This is Everyday Spirituality with Debbie Bronkema, and today I'm joined by Casey Carbone, who is a pastor at a nearby church and is the technology director or some title close to that for Hudson River Presbytery. And also, I have to say, we've known each other a long time because he was a child in the church that I've served as the first time I was a pastor. So I'm glad to see you today and get a chance to talk with you and catch up about how you're doing in terms of how do you get filled up spiritually with all the different pieces of your life and hats that you're wearing these days.
I appreciate that, Debbie, and thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you. And as you said, yeah, I seem to wear a lot of different hats these days, whether it be a pastor or working for the presbytery or, X, Y, and Z volunteer things. So trying to find that spiritual practice has certainly been something important, at least for myself.
For sure. So one of the reasons that I invited you is I saw that you were planning a sermon series on, I think it's Jimmy Buffett songs. And I just wondered how that fit into your journey. How did you come up with that? And how are you making that work in your life and in your church?
Yeah, so it is a bit of an eyebrow raiser. I'm doing a summer sermon series called The Gospel According to Jimmy Buffett, Songs of the Sea, Sinners, and Saints. So sort of a fun little title there. And we're taking some well-known Jimmy Buffett songs like He Went to Paris or Come Monday and comparing them or using them as a lens, I guess, to look at some scripture passages that are well known. And the idea for this sermon series, I think, stems from my own love of music. I like a lot of different kinds of music, but I really have a heart for songs and artists that tell stories with their music, both stories that are hopeful and songs that are stories that are upbeat, but also ones that can be vulnerable and authentic. And so I thought for our first sort of summer series of using a musical artist, and especially looking back at the year we just had, I thought, what better artist to use for this kind of sermon series than Jimmy Buffett.
That's great. That's great. So are you going to do his music? I know you are a musician on your own. So
of course, yeah. So part of our sermon series is I'll be doing a cover of one of his songs, and then right after that will be the scripture reading. So it's really interesting to hear the song and then compare that or use it as part of the meditation then for the day. So and being able to play these songs in worship is also a little bit of fun, I have to say.
That's awesome. That's great. And your congregation is excited or looking at you like you're a little crazy?
No, they're actually pretty excited about it. It's something different, and I think they know my love of music and where I'm coming from, so they were totally on board with it.
That's great. That's really fun. I love that. So one of the other questions I asked you about how you're surviving spiritually, you told me something about coffee, that you find that to be a spiritual practice. And I have to know what that is because I love coffee. So I want to hear that story too.
Yeah, so coffee for me is really my centering practice in the morning when I wake up. And it's more than just throwing coffee in like a Mr. Coffee and letting it run. Like I have a whole setup where I weigh out how many beans I use, like, and how much water I use, and I'm there grinding the beans, and then slowly over a course of a certain amount of time pouring out the water that's at a certain temperature. And like just going through this kind of ritual of knowing like what I do and then taking that time to really be present in that moment of making a cup of coffee in the morning and just having that sort of moment where I'm not thinking about anything else, and just sort of being real present in that moment, I find for me to be the centering practice that really starts off my day. In addition, of course, to providing a dose of caffeine.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful too. That's great though. I love that. The remembering to be present where you are is such a huge thing and so hard to do. We're always running in 10 directions. So
Well,
I
especially,
hear you.
for someone like me who is running around doing so many different things, not just in ministry, but in life, to really dedicate a portion of my morning where I am just focusing on something and using that to be fully present in something is a reminder of, yeah, how important that kind of spiritual practice is.
That's great. That's great. So you mentioned to me that when that there was something really kind of special about how these two calls came together, that it wasn't what you expected when you came here. You just came looking for the role as a pastor. How did it happen that you got the technology piece happening in your life too?
Yeah, I guess it would have to go back to when I left my first call as an associate pastor. And it was at a point in my life where I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next. And quite honestly, I myself was not in a great place. I was feeling just tired, a little burned out. I was feeling hurt by some of, past relationships and how things went. And so I knew, though, that God, through it all, I knew that God still wanted me to do ministry. And so I was looking at what calls were available a little closer to home. And so found this church in Hudson River Presbytery that was looking for a part-time pastor. And I thought, it would be a great time to still do ministry and also explore what other gifts I have. And a little while later, I found myself here. and and it was a great opportunity to be able to explore the other gifts in my life that I wasn't as in touch with before. Of course, technology was one of them, but even being able to explore things like music or trying out different art forms that I might not have tried before, which was great. And then by the time the pandemic hit and the presbytery was looking for someone to help resource congregations, then I was at a point in my life where I had a lot more figured out than when I did before. So it was really then this perfect timing, I guess you could say, or
That's great.
I think it is something that actually does feed my spirit in a way. And I guess I view it pretty similarly to how I view ministry or my call in a church, which is, I really love this idea of ministry being this journey of walking alongside people. And so whether that is in a church or helping a church discern what technology they need to carry out their mission or their sense of call or to what they're doing, then for me, I find that those two things sort of just jive with one another.
Okay.
And it's really, for me at least, this great complementary system.
Let's see. So you see your call as walking with people, no matter what it is you're doing, is what I'm hearing you say, I think, right?
I do. I find my sense of call as being this one of journeying. Um, I think if I had to think about it, I think there's actually this quote I remember reading from Gutierrez in the Liberation Theology,
Mm-hmm.
where he writes that neighbor is not they whom I'm find in my path, but rather those in whose path I place myself. And so sort of like this idea of like, our neighbor who, whether that be a congregation or churches that you're working with, it's like really coming on this path and walking it actively with
Yeah.
one another. And I think there's something beautiful in that.
So as you go forward, what are the things that you think are tools that are going to help you keep the peace that I see in you now?
Well, coffee obviously is one of them.
That's right.
Give me a good cup of coffee and I'm good to go. But besides that, I really do think for me, one of the core practices for myself goes back to music. I think as something that I've said before, and ironically enough, as I was exploring music in my previous call, I began getting really into the folk music tradition,
Uh-huh.
American folk music tradition, and just folk music in general, which ironically led me to Pete Seeger, who is someone I
Okay.
have come to really love, which seemed to be very fitting then that I made my way down to Hudson River Presbytery. But playing those kind of songs that speak to the heart and tell stories and paint this picture of what our lives can be together, for me, that's one of the things I think I'll always keep going back to. I think Pete Seeger would say, there's always a right moment for a right kind of song, and I think that's something I hold on to as well.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. So, is there anything else you wanted to share with us today that I haven't asked you?
Well, what else is there, Debbie? I think, for myself, thinking about spiritual practices for myself and trying to find calm, I think that is something still we see a great need of for those who are in our congregations or in our neighborhoods, those who live nearby. Even though, I think for myself, I thought we would have a year of being sort of still in quarantine. And it seems like that year of stillness and inward reflection didn't necessarily pan out the way I was hoping for, at least for us as people. So, I think being mindful of that, way for us to be that source of peace for one another as well. I don't know. That's something that comes back to mind for me at least.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there was the hope in the beginning that everything would slow down and people would remember what life was really about, and then it was just really noisy. So
Yeah.
yeah, and coming back, making sure that we're listening to what we did learn during this time feels really important. And the best of what we figured out would
Yes.
be a good thing to do. Yeah, for sure. Casey, it's been great talking with you and catching up with you. If people wanted to know more about you and what you're doing, where could they find you?
If people want to find out more about me, I do have a website, kccarbone.org, that they can go to. And I have like some sermons and music on there and rare occasional blog posts. So if people want to check that out, they're more than welcome to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been Everyday Spirituality with Connect.Faith.